Welcome back to the deep dive. You sent us a truly fascinating stack of sources this week, and they all seem to revolve around one pretty profound question. What if the traditional way we look at sin is, well, just profoundly incomplete? What if we've been diagnosing a terminal illness by just looking at minor symptoms?
That's a great way to put it.
Because these sources, they move way beyond seeing sin as just, rule breaking or the occasional ethical slip up. They reframe it as something much more catastrophic, structural even. The central metaphor, and this is really the backbone of our deep dive today, is just so potent. Sin is presented as a hostile takeover attempt.
It's an aggressive framing. It has to be.
So our mission today is to really get the gravity of this diagnosis. Why do they define sin as a terminal condition? And why do these sources argue that religious self-help is actually a form of unbelief? And then how is the solution defined as this complete external rescue operation? Okay, let's unpack this.
That framing is just so vital because it immediately shifts the whole discussion. We're not talking about something judicial anymore. We're talking about something ontological. It's not just about bad behavior. It's about a fundamental change in our very identity and our allegiance. And the sources are absolutely clear on this. The reality of sin is, as they say, much darker than a simple moral error.
It's cosmic treason.
It is. It's defined as this act where humanity attempts to literally fire the Creator, sever that primary relationship, and seize the controls for itself. When we try to become our own CEO, our own judge, and this is the crucial part, our own savior, that's the hostile takeover.
And when you look at it that way, the consequences are obviously far greater than, a dented reputation or a slight moral scrape. The result of this insubordination, as the sources highlight, is a complete and total shattering of the relationship.
Not just strained,
Yep.
shattered.
Exactly. It's a broken identity, and it's all driven by this grasping for control. And that grasping, it leads directly to what the sources call the self-made illusion. I mean, that is such a powerful phrase because it highlights this specific psychological trap. This is where we strive, relentlessly to reach God through our own merits, our own effort, our spiritual sweat equity. We try to earn our way back in.
And this is where the sources get extremely provocative, which is why this is also interesting. They label that very common striving, that religious self-effort, as a high-grade form of unbelief disguised as religious effort.
Okay, wait, let's stop there for a moment. That is a radical claim, because for most people striving to be better, trying to follow the rules, that is faith. So why do the sources flip that on its head and call that effort unbelief? What's the rationale there?
The core rationale is dependence. It all comes down to that.
Here.
If the starting diagnosis is that humanity attempted a hostile takeover and, shattered the relationship, then any attempt by us to repair that breach has to rely on the assumption that we still have the strength or the resources to fix it.
That we still have something to bring to the table.
Exactly. But the sources define true belief as total dependence on God's external power. So relying on your own power, even if you're aiming at a good spiritual outcome, is still fundamentally an act of unbelief because it denies the diagnosis. It's refusing to admit you have a terminal condition.
So the diagnosis isn't just that we have a serious problem, it's that we have a terminal condition. The sources really emphasize this, that humanity is utterly powerless to heal that breach. We cannot pull ourselves up by our spiritual bootstraps.
Precisely. And if we move from the diagnosis to the solution, the logic just holds perfectly. If we could, as the source material colorfully puts it, pay our own bail, or genuinely reform ourselves through some kind of self-improvement plan, then the entire singular act of divine intervention, the death and resurrection of Jesus, would have been, well, a waste.
A completely unnecessary action.
Absolutely unnecessary. The severity of the diagnosis is the only thing that justifies the severity of the cure. The sources basically dictate that God had to condemn our futile attempts and then take the judgment upon himself. Anything less than that level of intervention would suggest we were only, mildly sick, not terminally shattered.
That brings us right to the defining moment of the whole thing, and it's captured in what the sources dramatically frame as the courtroom swap. It provides this incredible visual summary of the entire rescue plan.
It really does.
You picture the scene, right? A defendant stands before the bench, definitively guilty of this hostile takeover, ready to get the full deserved sentence. But the moment of execution, it never comes. Instead of sentencing the defendant, the judge steps down from the bench, walks into the condemned's place, and takes the sentence on himself.
It's the ultimate act of external substitution. The cross, then, it isn't just some historical event we look back on with reverence. It is the divine verdict on our condition. And at the same time, it's the ends of self-help. It's the moment where every human ladder, every spiritual project is just declared totally redundant.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the cross is the verdict, the resurrection is the proof. It's proof that the rescue mission was successful and complete. The sources are so careful to define the resurrection not as some inspirational feeling or, a historical footnote, but as a genuine miracle that breaks into our reality from the outside.
And that confirms the external nature of salvation, what the sources call by the Latin term extra nos, which literally just means outside of us.
And to make this intuitive for you, the listener, the sources use that really vivid analogy of the drowning swimmer.
I love that analogy. It's perfect, isn't it? When you're drowning, you're not just swimming poorly towards some distant shore. You are paralyzed. You're failing. You are actively sinking. You cannot save yourself. So in this model, humanity isn't swimming toward God. We're drowning. We don't discover God through our own internal spiritual resources. He has to actively encounter us in a rescue mission.
And the drowning swimmer perfectly illustrates extra nose. That person can't be saved by pulling on their own hair or by just willing themselves onto the lifeboat. The rescue has to come from an external agent.
Exactly. And that external agent has to be capable of bridging what the sources call the infinite qualitative gap between the creator and the creature. I mean, it is an immense, uncrossable chasm. It's the difference between trying to jump a puddle and trying to jump from the Earth to the moon.
You just don't have the power or the platform to even start.
Precisely. Our inability to even begin to cross that gulf confirms our total, complete dependence on His grace for the rescue. The rescue has to be 100% accomplished outside our reality, then imported in, which leads us straight into the core of Section 3, the whole DIY trap.
And this is where we see that critical distinction the sources make between what they call religion and what they call revelation. And I think this is a distinction that many listeners might find immediately jarring.
It can be.
Because in this specific technical discussion, religion is emphatically not a good word. It's defined as a technical term for unbelief in action. It's the architectural metaphor of the Tower of Babel. It's man reaching up.
And this is where we really need to unpack the concept carefully. Religion, in this context, is the human attempt to manufacture a relationship, to build a spiritual ladder to heaven using our own tools, our intellect, our moral performance, our feelings, you name it. It's trying to bridge that gap ourselves.
And it's so relevant to modern life, isn't it? Where self-help and self-optimization are elevated to almost a secular religion. The sources are saying that when you apply that same self-made mentality to God, you are fundamentally rejecting the rescue. You are still trying to be your own savior.
That's it exactly. Because religion, defined this way, is trying to create a point of contact with the divine that completely bypasses the one and only contact point God actually established, the one He guaranteed. Jesus Christ. It's an attempt to circumvent the courtroom swap.
So if religion is man reaching up the DIY trap, how do the sources define revelation?
Well, revelation is the exact opposite movement. It's described as the invasion. It's God reaching down. Revelation is defined as God's sovereign, free act of making Himself known on His own terms through that singular external event of the cross and resurrection.
We're not collaborating on the bridge.
No, we are standing completely passive on the far side of that infinite qualitative gap, and we are receiving the divine invasion. The difference is 100% human effort versus 100% divine gift.
That makes the stakes extremely high when we get into Section 4. The echo chamber. Because if we deny the need for revelation, we're just left to define God based on what we can discover on our own, which the sources argue inevitably leads to idolatry.
Right.
The moment we rely on our own internal ability to understand the divine, what theology calls the analogy of being, we commit the ultimate form of that hostile takeover. We take God and we mold Him to fit the desires of the rebel CEO.
And that's the source of the selfie God. Idolatry here isn't about carving a physical statue. It's about psychological projection. We take our own image, our own desires, our own need for affirmation, and we just project them onto the sky. We create a God who fits our philosophical categories and our psychological needs.
A deity that looks exactly like us, only bigger and more capable. A God who will approve the hostile takeover we already committed. This God is a no God, because He's a mirror image, not the actual sovereign creator who judges and saves us.
It connects back perfectly to that famous observation from Karl Barth, which is cited in the sources. He says that this kind of self-serving religion is simply speaking of man in a loud voice and pretending it's God. We confuse our own echo for the divine command.
That's just a massive trap. So if our most earnest spiritual efforts are defined as unbelief and our own image of God is idolatry, what's the alternative? How do the sources define true faith?
They define it not as an achievement, not philosophical or moral, but as a pure gift we receive. True faith is the total opposite of grasping for control. It is the active posture of listening. The sources describe it with the physical image of open hands.
Just receiving.
Just receiving. It is the simple, receptive act of accepting the revelation that comes from entirely outside of us. I mean, if you're the drowning swimmer, you don't argue with the rescuer about technique, you let yourself be saved.
And this brings the entire argument full circle. We have to reiterate this conclusion. If human religion, that aggressive effort of reaching up, if it actually worked, the cross would be meaningless.
It would. The fact that God reached down in that singular sovereign act of the cross confirms that all of our strained, self-made attempts to build a ladder to heaven, they're not just insufficient, they are abolished. They're replaced by his complete and total work. We are passive recipients of an external rescue, period.
This has been a demanding but, wow, an incredibly focused deep dive into this material. It challenges some of the most fundamental assumptions we have about spiritual life. We've seen the definition of sin shift from just bad behavior to a cosmic power struggle, this hostile takeover, and salvation redefined as a singular, external, necessary act, the great courtroom swap, followed by the invasion.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
It really is. So what does this all mean? It means the deeply ingrained human impulse for self-made success, whether that's in business, life, or spirituality, is fundamentally opposed to the divine logic of a rescue mission. It forces us to ask at every single turn whether we are relying on our own perceived strength or on an act that was accomplished entirely outside of us.
And if the cross really does abolish all human attempts to bridge that infinite gap to heaven, this raises an important question for you, the listener. If you cannot rely on your own intellectual clarity, your own feelings, or your own moral striving to know God, what filter is left? In that radical vacuum of self-reliance, you are left to consider with the practical, daily act of listening, of keeping those open hands, what that truly entails.